Well, thank you for staying with us. The year 2023 for Nigeria has been described as not only a year for important elections, which will determine the economic trajectory for the country, but a year where higher interest rates will persist amidst high inflation and weaker Naira. As the global economy faces an imminent recession, the Nigerian economy has been projected to experience a slow growth rate for 2023 as a result of low oil output, insecurity, petrol subsidies, forex scarcity, amongst others. Major factors that will hamper the growth of a country's economic growth outlook this year. However, about 2 weeks to January 31st deadline for old Naira notes to cease as a legal tender, there is intense pressure on the Central Bank of Nigeria to review the implementation of its Naira Redesign policy, as businesses in the country as well as citizens are facing multiple challenges, and most are resorting to various electronic payment channels to carry out their transactions on account of scarcity of the new Naira notes. It will interest you to know that more than 1 month after the new Naira note was inaugurated, thirds of the new banknotes still persist, as many banks and automated teller machines and point-of-sale outlets are still dispensing the old Naira notes. Let's get more insight into this and look at some burning issues this Monday afternoon. I'm being joined virtually by the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of Cowry Asset Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. I know I've wished you Happy New Year on the other side, but let me wish you Happy New Year live here. It's good to have you on the show. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Tolu, for having me.
Let's start with this. I don't know how much of the new Naira notes you have, but I know that you don't have any problem with that. But Nigerians are still complaining about getting this new notes. I used the ATM yesterday evening, and I still got the old notes. What do you think about the whole process? Something is not just right somewhere. I don't know how it comes to you, Mr. Chukwu.
Well, how do you know that I don't have any issue with getting the new notes?
I think so.
Well, you must be a seer to be imagining that. But back to the issue, there is clearly some logistic challenge that the central bank may be having in terms of dispensing the new Naira notes. That should ordinarily have been. I think there are two things. One, there may have been a design to limit the volume of the new Naira notes, of Naira in circulation, by not dispensing so much of cash, and therefore compelled citizens to begin to use alternative payment platforms for their transactions. That could be one of the reasons why we're witnessing what's going on now. The second factor could be the central bank may be having some logistic challenges. If you consider the fact that there is a bank branch in almost all the local governments in the country, that may not have permeated all the nooks and crannies of the country. But they are POS operators, and they are also ATM machines, automated teller machines, that by now should be dispensing only the new Naira notes. So there's no justification whatsoever why these channels of dispensing of new notes are not exclusively dispensing new Naira notes. So, and that's why I said they are possible two reasons. One, a design by the central bank to limit the volume of currency in circulation, and two, possible bottlenecks or logistic challenges that it may be having in terms of the volume of cash it has printed, new Naira notes it has printed, and the channels for dispensing them to the public.
But if we have enough of this notes, because the CBN says it's too much of money out in circulation, that if we have more money of this monies in the vaults of the banks, what positive will this have for us? Is it about dispensing for small businesses, or what really is the positive in getting all of this monies into the vaults?
Well, if you talk of having the new Naira notes in the vaults, I think that statement is subject to some further interrogation or further proof, because I don't think the banks are kind of hoarding the new notes in their vault. It doesn't generate any income. Vault cash does not generate any income. It is not a matter of sure of strength to say I have so much of vault cash in my vault. So if they send the bank, commercial banks, the deposit money banks have the cash in their vault, they will ordinarily dispense them. And as it stands today, I don't think that if you go to the banking hall, you will see a queue lining up to collect the new Naira notes. What happens is that when people come into the banking hall, cash is dispensed to them for those who want to withdraw over the counter. And what the banks do is to dispense whatever cash is available to themselves. So if the banks have the old Naira notes and customers want to make withdrawals, the banks will be compelled to display the old Naira notes. But if the banks' vaults are only laden with new Naira notes, they will dispense only new Naira notes. So, and that's why I say there must be some logistic challenge in getting the new Naira notes to the banking vaults so that the banks can dispense them.
Just last week, the World Economic Forum raised concerns about Nigeria's health, the health of Nigeria's economy. And that is something that is really worrisome. I'm sure you saw that report. Was there anything really new in it? I think most of these issues have been identified before now. What was specific for you in that write-up?
Well, there was nothing new other than that it was coming from an independent source that the government or nobody in public sector will have the temerity to criticize. Many of us have cried ourselves hawks on the fact that our economy is very precarious. If you look at the third GDP growth rate, it was only 2.25%. Now back to below the population growth rate, and a decline from a 3.54% that we recorded in the third quarter of this, second quarter of last year. And then if you drive that further, you find out that the largest contributor to the GDP, which is agricultural sector, grew only by 1.34%. The manufacturing sector contracted by 1.99%. And then the trade sector only grew by about 5%. It was, the major growth was only basically the telecommunications sector that grew by about 10%. That can account for about 15.3% of the GDP, similar to what trade sector is accounting for. And then you have the financial services sector that grew by about 12%, but accounts for just about 4% of the GDP. So if you consider the fact that the two of the 4 or 5 major contributors to the GDP, you saw not just a slowdown in manufacturing sector, you saw a negative growth in the manufacturing sector, you saw a slowdown in trade sector, and then you saw a very weak growth in agricultural sector that accounts for almost a third of the economy. So clearly, and the factors that are impeding agricultural growth are still there. Issue of insecurity is still prevalent. On the trade sector, you still have issues of access to foreign exchange for import and for trade transactions, low consumer purchasing power. They are still there in the trade sector. And then the manufacturing sector, they're dealing with high energy costs, unstable energy supply, and then they are now also dealing with issues around high interest rates with the withdrawal of most of the concessional rate that were granted to them by the central bank, as well as difficulty in assessing effects for their input material, including stock. So these factors are still there. So it's no brainer that the economy will slow down further this year if nothing changes.
Moving on in that detailed report, it also says that companies need to strategically position themselves for long-term benefits. Now, looking at all of the challenges that are on ground, saying there needs to be some structural kind of change. Let's talk more about this structural change. What kind of structural change, or what kind of change do we really need? We see most of the presidential candidates today talking about bold steps that needs to be taken this time in Nigeria. What are these bold steps, some of these bold steps? Can we identify them?
Well, there are your two questions. Your question is double-barreled. Let's take the second part of it, which touches on the macroeconomic policies. The bold steps any president elected into power on February 25th should take are many bold steps. One of which is to address the issue around the foreign exchange policies of the country. We need to harmonize the exchange rate. And possibly when we harmonize the exchange rate, we're going to end up with a lower than parallel market rate, which will even help bring down inflation rate. The second bold measure that the new government must take is the issue of subsidy. This year, we have budgeted a 3.36 trillion naira as subsidy payment for the first 6 months of the year. And if you go to the streets, you realize that people are not even buying this product at subsidized rate. Other than Lagos and some parts of Abuja, if you go outside these 2 major cities, you are going to buy the petrol at near commercial market rate, which means the subsidy is not getting to the hands of average consumers who they are meant to benefit. Then you look at the issue around the way we manage our oil sector, improving the issue of insecurity in the country, what we need to do to address the issue of insecurity, particularly in the northern part of the country, as well as addressing the issue of oil theft. If a government comes in and addresses these critical factors, they would have taken some of those steps. One of the things I need to add is that I have always said it repeatedly as different fora, that given our current revenue profile, the government cannot continue to fund infrastructure from budgetary allocation. We need to develop a robust framework for allowing private sector to invest in commercially viable infrastructure and free up government resources so that we do not continue to borrow at the rate we are borrowing. Because even the borrowing we are making, we know that the private sector is a better utilizer of economic resources. So if the private sector can do it more efficiently and cost effectively, why do we have to borrow and heap debt burden and interest payment obligation on the national treasury, something we could have handed over to the private sector? So for me, these are the bold steps the government, an incoming government should take. Then back to the other part of your question, what are the structural changes corporate organizations should look at? One of which is that look at your energy supply source. If you can pivot away from national grid and possibly ensure that you have access to gas supply, which is a little more reliable than electric supply in the country, you are likely going to get a better energy supply. And then you also have to look at how can you generate your raw material input from local sources, given the FS scarcity we have in the country. So these are some of the structural changes the corporate organizations will be able to look at.
All right, finally, before I'll let you go, Mr. Chukwu, a lot of talks around debt, and it's really getting scary. I don't know how worried you are about Nigeria's debt, but we see the Finance Act, which is supposed to come with the budget to augment or to help government raise more money. But there's been a lot of holes. The experts have picked holes in this very Finance Act 2022. I don't know if what you say around that. Government must not be too aggressive so that our business people don't run away from investing in this country.
The government is taking the easy way out, which is just tax them more, take more from the few who have the capacity to pay. And then until you tax them to death. That, for me, will not be the best approach. The first thing we should look at is that what are the government expenditures? Are they discretionary expenses that can be eliminated? I've talked about issue of subsidy. I've talked about issue of capital expenditure. If you look at the 2022-2023 budget, take the first half of the year, which you have 3.36 trillion naira as subsidy, add about 6.4 or 6.6 trillion naira as capital expenditure. You're already about over 10 trillion naira, which is approaching the total deficit of 11.34 trillion naira this year. So if we can only have a rethink on these two items alone, we are likely going to reduce the subsidy payment. There's a premium of 8.83 trillion naira as recurrent, non-debt recurrent expenditure of the federal government. I believe that that amount of 8.3 trillion naira could be more effectively and more efficiently deployed, that we don't have to spend that much on non-debt recurrent expenditure. These are areas that we can cut down on government expenditure and reduce the borrowing we have today. If anybody is not worried about Nigeria debt cost, the person must have to be examine his thought process again. If you look at last year, 2022, by November, the total federal government revenue was 6.5 trillion naira. At the same time, January to November, the government has spent 5.24 trillion naira in debt service. That was 80% of total federal government revenue. So if you are not worried that you spend 80% of your total revenue in debt service, then there's some problem somewhere. And clearly, I'm worried, and I think we must pivot away from the current trajectory, because if we continue that way, we are going to be left with a fiscal framework that will be difficult to manage.
Well, it's an interesting way to live it, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. It's always nice talking to you. Clarity on all of those issues. Well, let's see how it all plays out. But in 1 minute, if you can tell us what is your outlook with all of this bleak figures and all of that we see. And we also expect inflation figures to be in any time from now.
Well, Tolu, the first half of the year, we're going to continue to model through our current conditions. But a lot will now the outlook in the second half of the year will be determined by the outcome of the election to hold on 25th of February. If we get it right with the election, then we should expect policy changes, including a total overhaul of the current budget, and then we should be able to come up with policies that will make the economy attractive to foreign and local investors.
I must thank you so much, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Thank you for your time. Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer, Cowry Asset Management Limited. Do enjoy the rest of your Monday.
My pleasure.